Hello, I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer. Welcome to Gospel Minded, where we spend a few minutes each week talking about psychology, our emotions, our behavioral health, and we reflect on how these important topics are related to the Sunday Gospel reading for each week. Now, like always, this isn't intended to be a substitute for actually going to church or spiritual direction, therapy, counseling, if you're involved in any of those sort of practices. But like we know so well, our psychology, things of the mind, and our spirituality so often go hand in hand. So here we are, another Sunday where we're trying to be gospel-minded and understanding how our Sunday Gospel reading is relevant to our psychology. So today's reading comes from the Gospel of Mark. It's from chapter 4, and it starts at verse 35. It's the story of Jesus calming the storm at sea. So let me read it for you. It says, "On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, 'Let us go across to the other side.' And leaving the crowd, they took him with them, just as he was, in the boat. And other boats were with him. And a great storm of wind arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?' And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.' And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said to them, 'Why are you afraid? Have you no faith?' And they were filled with awe and said to one another, 'Who is this that even wind and sea obey him?'" So that's the gospel reading for today. What a really fascinating piece of scripture from Mark's gospel. Now, there are a lot of things that can be said about this particular gospel reading, certainly theologically. We can go into the origins of this part of Mark's gospel and talk about the linguistic pieces of it, and all of that is really relevant and important. But a couple of things I want to draw out from it related to our psychology. First of all, I want to point out just one thing that stood out to me in the early part of that reading is this spontaneity. Here the Lord is saying, let's go to the other side. It doesn't seem like they had planned that or arranged for that to happen beforehand. Maybe didn't talk about it. So all of a sudden they decide kind of at the spur of the moment, they're going to go in the boats to the other side of the water. And I love that because so often we find ourselves being put in these situations that are somewhat spontaneous. We don't always get to think things through and plan things out the way that perhaps we would like. And sometimes we find ourselves in situations where we're just sort of tossed in. We're going to the other side. We're taking this trip. However that discussion looked for Jesus and the disciples in the gospel, you and I have similar discussions all the time with family, friends, co-workers, where we'll have these situations arise where, okay, I wasn't prepared for this or I hadn't planned this out, but we're going to do something new. We're going to take a trip. We're going to do this. We're going to do that, whatever. For some people, that's very difficult. If somebody really wants to feel in control and have everything thought out thoroughly and perfectly planned, such occasions are going to be difficult for them, where there's this spur of the moment, let's just go for it kind of thing. Now, I've talked before about the different personality types and some of the big personality factors, and I've talked before about agreeableness. If you're a type of person who tends to score high on that agreeableness scale, when you get tossed into a situation like that, you're probably going to fare very well because you're more prone to be agreeable when situations are unique or different, or you haven't had the opportunity to plan it out or think it through. Again, if you're more prone or apt to be agreeable, those sort of situations probably aren't going to cause you a lot of stress or bother you too much. But if you're one of those sort of folks that tends to score a little bit lower on the agreeableness scale, when you find yourself in those sort of situations where a new situation is thrust upon you or a set of circumstances comes up for which you are not prepared, it might be kind of challenging to navigate that. And so my thought is this: if you're a sort of person who is scoring lower on that agreeableness scale, you're not as open to some of those spur of the moment things, those periods where you might not have everything perfectly in your control, what I would do is look for small ways that you can practice being more comfortable in those situations that you may naturally feel more uncomfortable in. And I don't know what that might look like for you, but the truth of the matter is that it happens all the time that situations come up for which we're not prepared, that we don't have everything laid out or thought through or planned or prepared. And guess what? In real life, we still have to keep on rolling and figure out a way to get through and make it work. And so again, if you're one of those folks that is having a hard time when that stuff comes up, maybe find little ways that you can practice coming out of that comfort zone and working through it and building that resiliency. So that was the first thing that stood out to me from this gospel reading. And then the next part is this great image of the storm at sea. Now again, spiritually, I'm sure a lot could be said about that. Perhaps it's reflective of the storms that we face in our life all the time. But I think what stood out to me as a psychologist, as a therapist, is this whole idea of asking for help when we're in the midst of those trials, when we're in the thick of weathering the storm. The disciples finally go to the Lord and say, hello, wake up. Don't you care that we're perishing? I have observed so often that people will be in the midst of tremendous storms in the course of their life, where they're facing all kinds of difficult circumstances, a lot of challenges and hardships, but they don't go and tap somebody on the shoulder and say, hey, I need some help here. They don't go to their friends. They may not go to their family members. They probably aren't going to come to me as a psychologist or therapist. So often there's this tendency to try and weather the storm on our own and just figure it out. Hope that the storm will pass. Now, to be sure, that is a strategy, but so often it's not the best strategy. What is most helpful is when we are in the midst of these big storms that come up in the course of our life, what is going to be more helpful for us is taking that step to reach out to a family member, to friends, to a counselor, somebody you trust, and letting someone else in that moment and saying, hey, I'm going through a lot right now. Perhaps even taking the words of the disciples and saying, do you care that I am perishing here? I mean, we may not use that exact terminology, but when we're reaching out, looking for some help, in essence, that's what we're saying. I need you to care right now. I need somebody to bounce something off of. I need somebody to hear me out, somebody to listen to me, somebody to help me along during this difficult chapter in my life, or whatever it may be. And so if you're one of those people for whom it is really a challenge to reach out to help, take a note from the disciples in today's gospel reading that we can go to somebody and say, hey, I need you to wake up and help me right now. And then that spiritual component too, we can always go to the Lord in our prayer, through our intercessions and our And in our prayer life, we can always ask the Lord for that help as well and trust ourselves in whatever circumstances or situations we find ourselves in, offering those up to the Lord and asking for help. You know, as I was thinking about this scene today, the calming of the storm, I don't know if you've ever had a circumstance where you were really scared for your life. I've had that happen, I think, twice, and they were both in the Midwest. I remember I was in college and I was visiting Omaha, Nebraska for the summer, and there was a huge storm. It was about this time of year, late June, early July, and the sky turned black. It was mid-afternoon, and rain came pouring down, and thunder and lightning, and then the wind came, and it was looking like there was going to be a tornado. And in the Midwest, watching those sort of weather patterns are just part of a way of life. Everybody's fascinated by it, it seems. And the sirens went off, and of course all the people I was with said, you can't go outside. So what did I do in my early 20s? I went right outside because I was invincible and nothing was going to hurt me, and I wanted to see the storm. Well, I got out into the storm and I saw way more than I wanted to. And I won't forget that time when the wind just really picked up and I felt what to me, it seemed like the start of a tornado. But I was terrified, absolutely petrified in that moment, so fearful. And I've never forgotten it because it was just one of those few times where I was really afraid for my life. And what a consolation it was when I regained my composure and got back indoors and was safe in that refuge. My friends, our family members, our friends, our peers, counselors, pastors, therapists, counselors, these sort of people can be that refuge for you, that safe place when you're in the midst of whatever storm life has thrown at you. So these are a couple things that I took from our gospel reading today. If you found them useful or helpful, I hope that you will click like and subscribe and share this. Pass it along to somebody else who may need to hear it. We'll try it again next week, and we'll keep doing our best to live gospel-minded. So, I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer. I hope you have a good week. I am gospel-minded. Take care.